music felt really right. All right. Hi, everyone. We still have people trickling in. As you do, come in, share who you are, where you're calling from, and three things that you're passionate about. But we're so excited to be here. We're so excited to see all of you. I recognize some friendly faces here. So thank you all so much for joining us. And I can't even tell you how excited Julius and I are to be launching this work into the world. It's something that we have been working on for like 7 or 8 months in earnest. And now it's out in the world, and here we are. So thank you guys for joining us in this celebration. I am Lindsay Coleman. I am the executive director of Community Spring. And today we're here to talk about civic engagement, voting, community building, and mobilizing communities that have historically been left out. Let me get to the next slide. So on our agenda tonight, we have about 45 minutes together, which is great. We're going to try to keep this concise. Julius is going to kick us off with some of the inspiration behind the initiative. He's also going to share a little bit about Community Spring. Then I'm going to talk about the design of the initiative. And then we have two special guests joining us tonight. Bob Leibel, who's from the Sentencing Project, and Dr. Robert Stewart, who is a professor of criminology from the University of Maryland. And then I will close us out. All right, so Julius is the person behind all of this. He is the inspiration for the initiative, and also leading the charge here. So Julius is the community engagement coordinator here at Community Spring. I have known him since 2020, and then he joined the team at Community Spring in 2021 as a fellow, and then has been a part of our community ever since. And we're so happy to have him on the team as permanent staff leading the charge on this work. So, Julius, tell us a little bit about the origin here.
Okay, Lindsay, I just want to thank you for that awesome introduction. I also want to thank everybody for being here, for sacrificing this time out of your evening to see what we got going on. I really, really appreciate it, right? So let's get to the origin story. Where did this come from? How did this happen, right? So growing up, right, I never learned anything about politics. I never learned anything about the importance of civic engagement. No one in my community ever talked about it. Neither did my parents. They never talked about it to us or around us. The only thing that I ever can remember hearing about anything related to politics was that it doesn't matter who in office. We've always had it hard. It is what it is. So growing up, I was taught, and I grew up believing that if you wanted something, you just had to work hard for it. And naturally, I assumed that if I didn't have it, I just simply wasn't working hard enough. Early in my life, my parents taught me about racism, open and outward racism, but also systemic racism. Um, they taught me that I'd probably have it harder in life because of all the negative stereotypes surrounding Black men, especially Black men who came from poverty the way that we did. And they told me that if I wanted to get along in this system, I had to just go along, right? So essentially, what they were teaching me, right, was how to adapt to the system the same way they did. They wasn't teaching me that I could be a change maker or how to actually make changes. And so I just silently accepted their truth as my own. But I watched them, I paid attention. I saw how hard they worked. I saw how they never had any time and how we still didn't have much. So I kind of knew there had to be more to the story. I just didn't know what though. So I kind of just silently accepted their truth as my own until one day I heard another story, the story of Black history, the story of Malcolm X, the story of Dr. King, Fred Hampton, the Black Panthers, the Civil Rights Movement, and other stories of people who just fought back, who refused to just accept things as is. So in that moment in school, during Black History Month, a seed was sown that would it would be watered over the years through my interactions with the system as a teen and as an adult. But that seed didn't fully blossom until I started working with FRC and Florida Immigrant Coalition around voter registration. And if I'm being honest, right, at the time I still didn't even believe in voting. I didn't believe in the system. I was doing it for the money, but once I really understood and saw what Desmond Meade and registered voters were able to accomplish through Amendment 4, it really just, connected a lot of dots for me. And it just like opened my mind tremendously. During that time, I made the New York Times twice in print and in podcast for the things I was doing around voter registration. I got like 8,000 people registered to vote. But I couldn't help but think to myself, right? Like, how many of these people are actually going to go out and vote? How many of these people know how to effectively use their vote? And I was thinking that, so give somebody the tool of voting without explaining how to do the work, it still leaves them at a disadvantage. You could give me a toolbox and sit me in front of a car and say change the transmission, but I wouldn't know what to do, even though I have the tools because I've never done the work. And the vote itself is a very, very powerful tool, but it's so much more to it than that. People need to understand how to effectively utilize their vote. They need peer leadership to show them the way, and they need to understand who to hold accountable for harmful policies, how to organize around community problems, how to understand what's happening locally, statewide, and nationally. And also they need to learn how to resist systemic pressure while still pressing forward toward like better solutions. And the average person living at or below the poverty line has to work twice as hard for stability, peace, and education. So I was thinking when making this program, what would be the most effective way to get them this information where we actually stick. And I thought that we should meet them where they're at, meet them in their homes, meet them in their communities, meet them in their comfort zones, because for me, right, this isn't just about voting and voter turnout. Sure, that's definitely a big part of it. But for me, it's about returning political identity to our disenfranchised community members and loved ones all over the state of Florida. It's like we're playing the game of democracy with 1.4 million of our teammates, fellow Floridians, sitting on the bench. I mean, we should activate them. Let's activate them and bring them to the conversation. Let's get them in the room. And I think that it's clear now more than ever that whatever we've been doing isn't working anymore. And we got to try something new. And we need everybody in on this. And the reason why I feel like Community Spring is the perfect organization to lead this initiative here in the state of Florida is because, for one, we're a nonpartisan 501c3, and we've already been doing this work right through our fellowship. I came through the fellowship at the perfect time of my life. I was at like a fork in the road where things could have went either way with me. I could have been like went left and been everything that stats and stereotypes said that I would be. But I went through the fellowship, and it like facilitated a space for me to heal while still receiving the information and still providing some kind of financial compensation for my immediate needs. And they added their technical skills, their knowledge of policy and systems to my lived experience and created the powerhouse that you see sitting in front of you here today. And also, here at Community Spring, we envision creating economic justice by disrupting the cycle of poverty and mass incarceration. And some people ask me when I say this, like, what does economic justice mean? What is that? What does that term even come from? And this is how I explain it most times, right? I say that economic justice is about collective well-being and meaningful access to income, power, and community. Now, one of the key words in that to me is meaningful, because some people have limited access to some of those things, but we need meaningful access. And so we have three program areas here at Community Spring. Get used to hearing income, power, and community. You'll probably hear a lot more, right? So in the just income program area, we have the guaranteed income. We've given over $1 million to 172 participants. And guess what? You would not believe this. Those people actually stay out of jail, stay out of prison, are doing a lot better for themselves, and they now believe in change. That's amazing. Who would have ever thought that money would be the answer to poverty? Go figure, right? And then you got the Just Power program area. That's where we do some of our systemic change and policy work through that. And also that's where the fellowship lives at, right? And through that, we've already made so much impact here in the local Gainesville area. We've done away with, I think, like something like 15 fines and fees, free phone calls in the county jail. And guess what, right? This is crazy to me. It may be normal to you all, but here in Alachua County, they used to charge you for being incarcerated. The person who was locked up had to pay to be in the county jail. They had to pay to be there. We did away with that through the Just community area, through the Just Power area program area of our organization, and then you have the Just community area. We believe our mission statement or our theory of change inside of the Just community area is building power and bridging gaps that isolate us so everyone feels fully valued and is involved in driving change. In this area, we have the storytelling for change workshops. We have the letter writing initiative where we write letters to our incarcerated loved ones and community members to first and foremost to let them know that this chapter of their life doesn't define their whole story, and to make them aware of who we are as a resource to them when they get out. And then now we have this amazing community power building initiative through civic engagement, right? And right now I'm here in Atlanta, and it's convening full of justice impacted leaders, right? And the thing about epiphanies or good ideas to the person that has it, you feel like I'm the first one to think of this. But I was surprised and also encouraged when I got here and understood that so many people nationally understand what I understand through this program is needed. It's the perfect time. And with that being said, I won't hold you anymore. I'll pass it to Lindsay.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Julius. Your story around this work is so inspiring. I mean, 8,000 registered voters, but how many of them are showing up to the polls, right? And I think that and just for some background here, Julius first pitched me on this in 2022, and it wasn't the right time for the organization. It wasn't something that we could pull off at that moment. And our organization, we founded in 2020, so we're still a new organization. And then 2025 happened, and I'm like, this feels like actually a really good time to unpin that idea. So thank you for continuing to be a force of inspiration for me and making this work happen. Okay, so yes, I'm Lindsay Coleman. I'm the executive director of Community Spring. I founded the organization, co-founded in 2020. Before I jump into some of the design elements of this initiative, I want to give you all a little background and explain why inclusive democracy is so necessary to advance economic justice. So in Florida, right now, there are about 1 million Floridians who are unable to vote because of their record. Felony disenfranchisement laws have their roots in post-Reconstruction era efforts to disenfranchise Black Americans following the end of slavery. And what's really interesting about the racial component of all of this is it actually affects more white people than Black people because there are more white people. But it's so clear how the disproportionate impact on people of color is that racial prejudice is so clearly to suppress Black political voices. About a third of those who are disenfranchised in Florida are Black. And so in 2018, the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, led by Desmond Meade, who Julius referenced earlier, ran this historic campaign to pass Amendment 4. I mean, it was a ballot initiative, it was grassroots, it passed with flying colors. I mean, so inspirational. And then in 2019, our state legislature reinterpreted what it meant to serve your sentence to include fines and fees and restitution, which re-disenfranchised about 80% of the people that Amendment 4 was meant to restore their voting rights, which is insane. And it's worth mentioning, too, that Florida's pay to vote system, which we now have, is unique because it also does not, we also don't have a central database that tells you how much you owe. So that means that a whole bunch of people who were legally registered to vote in 2018 then voted in 2020 without knowing that it was no longer legal for them to vote because how would you be able to follow the legal battle that was going on at the time? I mean, I remember in 2020 people coming to me and being like, "Can I vote?" And I'm like, "I literally have no idea." And I read the news a lot and stay up to date on these things. And it was just at the time so challenging to parse through who could vote and who couldn't. And so then in 2022, there were widespread arrests that started actually in Alachua County. We were the hotbed of that, and then trickled out through the rest of the state, where people were arrested and convicted of a new felony charge of voting fraud. And these were people who, at the time when they were registered, it was legal for them to be registered. And we have some of these people who are a part of, our community here, and it was like really heartbreaking at the time. I mean, we had one person who they sent dogs in his house. They broke down the door. I mean, this was for felony voting fraud when they in fact thought it was legal for them to vote. So I say all that to say that this is a complicated issue. It's both a structural one and a social one, right? Because there's structural barriers and now there's so much fear. Let's go to the next slide. And I want to take a minute to talk about some of the sort of more like social cultural barriers. But even before all of this, sort of regardless of your status as in your record, poverty has been the thing that has shut people out from democracy forever. People who are experiencing poverty are less likely to vote. They're less likely to show up with sort of government accountability measures, less likely to do community organizing. And I think that this is an outcome of oppression. Mistrust is an outcome of oppression. I think Julius really illustrated this well when he talked about his story growing up, where you're taught to adapt to oppressive systems rather than change it. And the message is so clear, like, this isn't built for you, so stay out of it, right? Like the system has been so unresponsive to the needs of low-income communities. Why would you participate in it when it's not really for you anyways? And what hope is there to change it? What this does is create a real void where destructive policies flourish unchallenged and where the priorities of low-income non-voters are completely ignored. So we see all the sort of social cultural barriers. And then, of course, there's like the logistical, practical ones through disenfranchisement of people with records and our pay to vote system, which is, in essence, a poll tax. And when you have a poll tax, guess who benefits and guess who it hurts, right? If you can pay it, great, you have a voice. If you can't pay it, then you don't. Let's go on to the next slide. And for people with records, there are so many barriers to opportunities for income. How could you possibly be able to pay it? I mean, that's not true. Obviously, people do, but there are so many barriers in place because the people who are released from prison have the most debt and the least ability to pay it off. They're excluded from jobs and housing. Often, for people on probation, face the threat of reincarceration if they're unable to pay their probation fees. I mean, people in our office talk about all the time having to choose between eating and paying your fees so that you don't violate and go back. I mean, the math here is pretty morbid. And so these policies are keeping people with records down and trapped in this cycle of poverty. And now we're denying them the ability to vote, which is like a basic right of citizenship. I mean, we talk about returning citizens, but when you come home and you're excluded from opportunities to meet your basic needs and the right to vote, is that still citizenship? These injustices, like they fester in the darkness, and voting is such an important tool to bring something to light. What this shows is that inclusive democracy is a critical part of advancing economic justice. Next slide. What we need is a community-centered solution. So we're mobilizing people who have historically been left out of the conversation, particularly those impacted by felony disenfranchisement, to become active leaders and engaged voters in their own community. Our current system is unresponsive to the needs of our community, leaving people feeling like they have no place in it. Disenfranchisement is one of the many ways that our system pushes people with felony records to the fringes and signals to them that they don't matter. Through community power building, we're connecting personal experiences of injustice to larger systemic change. So we're doing this in two phases. Excuse me. We're doing this in two phases. The first phase, we've already done a light launch of, and that is workshops. So these workshops are in target neighborhoods. The purpose is to discuss with people how to make informed decisions during elections, how to advocate for policies that directly benefit them and their communities, how to hold elected leaders accountable. And then also some sort of basics around community organizing. How do we collaborate with each other to build stronger, healthier communities? The hope is that we will, through these workshops, we'll be able to issue or facilitate the issuing of official advisory opinions to anyone who's been impacted by federal disenfranchisement. We do have a close partnership with the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, who does a lot of voting restoration for our clients currently. So hoping to expand in these neighborhoods. And what these advisory opinions do is outline, are you eligible to vote? What's required to get you eligible? And being able to facilitate that process for people. One of the things that makes this initiative really cool is that it counts towards court mandated community service. So some debt can be converted to community service. We can help facilitate that process. And then you can do your community service with us with the hopes that at the end you'll be able to restore your voting rights. And our partnership with FRC makes a lot of this possible. Next slide. So the second phase is what we're calling the amplification phase. This is relational organizing. And we know from research and from doing it ourselves that relational organizing works really well among people with lots of distrust. The obstacle is to break out of echo chambers. And it's really hard to bring new ideas into communities at scale. And the only way to do it is to have the information come from people you know and respect. So with this phase, we'll be identifying local leaders through our workshops, doing a train the trainer type course. And then those new leaders will be able to conduct their own monthly workshops in other communities and neighborhoods that they have a footprint in. This phase is how we scale the initiative. It's where the big impact lies. It's also funding dependent. We've not secured funding yet for this phase. We have for the workshops, we're doing it. The amplification phase, we so desperately need and need to, the next step is to leverage our networks, raise the money to make it happen. It's extremely hard to sustain this without additional funding. We have the playbook, but now we need the resources to make it happen. Next slide. Oh, we switched the order. So let's go to Bob first. So Bob, we're so excited to have you here, one of our guests for this evening. He is a nationally recognized civil rights leader and community organizer. He currently is the senior campaign strategist at the Sentencing Project, which is a research and advocacy nonprofit working towards decarceration and addressing racial disparities in the criminal legal system. He's also the former executive director of Grassroots Leadership, which did a relational organizing civic engagement project similar to this one. So, Bob, would love to pass the mic to you and hear about sort of what the national movement looks like. What was your experience like at Grassroots Leadership?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, and this is very inspiring and exciting. And I appreciate being here to witness part of its launch. I am at the Sentencing Project, and we're a national advocacy and research organization. And my work focuses on supporting state and local organizations around the country on campaigns to restore rights for people who are disenfranchised due to a felony conviction, and also to expand ballot access to eligible justice-impacted people. And also, I think that there's this kind of new phase of developing organization around that ballot access in justice-impacted communities more broadly. And so it's really exciting to see these kind of initiatives popping up around the country. I also helped write a brief with Rob Stewart, who is here, and Dr. Hannah Walker, who's a professor at the University of Texas. I'll drop that report in the chat, but that's kind of how we became connected, and it's a little bit of a overview of the kinds of voter mobilization projects that have intersected with researchers and looking at the way that the way that these projects have kind of played out and been effective. I think just to talk a little bit about the landscape of disenfranchisement, there are still 4 million Americans who are barred from voting due to felony convictions, formally barred. There's also more than 650,000 people who are incarcerated in jails, who many of whom are sort of functionally locked out of the voting system, although that is also starting to change in a positive direction. But I think that what we have seen, and Lindsay, I think you kind of laid this out in Florida, right, is we've really seen things move in a positive direction in many places. And apologies, we're just getting hit. I'm based here in Austin, Texas, and we're getting hit by a storm. So if you hear thunder and light and see lightning, that's what's happening behind me. Um, uh, uh, but we've seen the number of people who are disenfranchised around the country decline by about 2 million people over the last decade, right? Thanks to advocacy efforts led by justice impacted people, right? So I think that is like one phase of what we've seen. Since 97, 26 states and the District of Columbia have restored rights to some group of people, whether those people are completely post-sentence, like in Florida, or folks who are on parole and probation, like Rob can talk about Minnesota, New Mexico most recently, or in the case of the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, to all people, including people who are currently incarcerated. And Maine and Vermont never disenfranchised anyone due to a felony conviction. So folks there are eligible and do vote from prison even when currently incarcerated for a felony. And I guess I would also note that a lot of these reforms, all these reforms are due to advocacy, and some of them took decades to achieve. And it is certainly true, as Lindsay said, that no state disenfranchises more people than Florida. And there has also been no bigger reform in terms of the number of people re-enfranchised, even with, the sort of setbacks from the legislature than Amendment 4 in Florida. So it's really exciting to see Community Spring and others sort of take on the challenge, which the way I see it is that legal restoration does not mean equal participation, right? I think where we see groups now around the country is thinking about how do we actually mobilize these newly eligible people. So moving from eligible vote to actually voting and building power. And that's where we see the movement going. And our research shows that, sort of looking at the research shows that people will vote when brought into the work, that the messenger is incredibly important. So trusted messengers and involvement in community organization are two of the things that can really, ratchet up the propensity of someone to participate. Um, uh, and that these factors are really key to overcoming, I think, the justifiable alienation and distrust of government institutions that we see in so many folks who've been impacted by the criminal legal system. And we even see, this kind of work taking place in correctional facilities, right? So I think one of the most interesting pieces of data that we have is that, when you provide an easy way for people to vote, like a polling location in a jail, and you provide civics education and voter registration efforts and trusted messengers, that in many parts of the country, we've even seen polling locations in jails have higher participation than the broader community. So the idea that people with criminal legal experience don't want to vote is simply not true, right? It's that you have to have trusted messengers, you have to have community organization, and you have to have access. And I think in places like Florida in particular, you have to have really solid education because of the risks that Lindsay laid out due to, the state legislatures, and the government's attempts to recriminalize people for voting offenses. So for us, why does it matter, right? I mean, I think that part of it is a racial justice issue for all of the reasons that Lindsay laid out, right? Clearly, in Florida, like in many parts of the country, the racial disparities are great, and that those racial disparities in the criminal legal system translate very directly into formal and sort of de facto disenfranchisement. It's also a democracy issue. I think about my friend Robert here in Texas, a colleague of mine at Grassroots Leadership, who's disenfranchised because he's on parole for the next 23 or 24 years because of a nonviolent offense here in Texas. And he talks about being not just a justice impacted person, right? But he's also a father, a husband. He's someone who works in local government. He's part of his union. He's in nonprofit leadership roles. He pays taxes. His kids go to the local school. He owns a business, but he's unable to have a formal voice in something as simple as a school board race or a city council race, right? But he did join this research project with Dr. Walker and Grassroots Leadership here in Texas, helping ensure that others were aware that they could vote and building kind of a community around justice impacted people participating in the electoral system, either formally by voting or through telling their loved ones and educating their loved ones on their eligibility. And then I think that a final reason to do this is that it reduces people's contact with the criminal legal system, right? Voting is a pro-social activity, and research shows that justice impacted people who vote are less likely to be rearrested, and there's strong evidence that expanding ballot access can be a public safety strategy. And I think that is a way that we increasingly think about it, that civic engagement can be a harm reduction strategy. It can be a public safety strategy, in addition to be a power building democracy and racial justice issue. So thanks for having me. And I'm looking forward to hearing Rob take on the research aspect as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That was incredibly helpful. So now I want to introduce Rob. So Dr. Robert Stewart, he is faculty at the University of Maryland. He's a criminologist and a 2022 Emerson Collective Fellow. His sort of area of expertise is around the social, political, and collective consequences of the criminal legal involvement with an emphasis on accumulating effects, which I think is really interesting. So with that, Rob, I would love to hear your thoughts.
Well, thank you, Lindsay. Thank you for having me. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm in a Delta Sky Club because I'm about to fly somewhere. Sorry for the inconvenience. No, it's been great to listen to hear people's thoughts on these things and thinking about the work that you all are doing at Community Spring and the things that have been happening in Florida in particular. Listening earlier, I was at the beginning of this listening to Julius talking about how this the stories that he heard growing up. And I think we all live by this, the stories that are the soundtrack for our lives in a lot of ways, right? The things that our parents tell us or our families or our loved ones or the people that we look up to and talk about who we are and how the world works and all those kinds of things. And, frankly, I don't think there's any fault in, as Julius mentioned, saying that look, those people in power, they're not working for us. They're not working for us, right? Because there's a lot of truth to that in history and everything else. And I think that that what makes this an opportunity potentially is that this is an opportunity to help not just change those stories, but actually change that reality. So I do a lot of research on, as Lindsay said, on how the criminal legal system impacts people's lives and their communities and their families and everything, but not just like at flashpoints, but just over time, right? Through repeated context and how it really kind of shapes people's life courses. And what I have noticed is, and what I've found is that when it comes to like disenfranchisement, for example, Bob had mentioned that there's something almost 2 million people have had their voting rights restored in the last, say, 10 years or so. And just to put another number on that, since 2016, the disenfranchised population, or the population of people who couldn't vote because of a felony record, at least based on our estimates, fell by 31%. Right, so the population is much smaller. What that tells us is that the organizations, the activists, the advocates, the policymakers that have been working on these issues for a long time, they're having a lot of really great success, and I think that's something that we have to applaud, and that's something that we definitely have to acknowledge. Because frankly, I, as an academic, a lot of the work that we do is, really highlighting and focusing on really terrible things that happen in the world. And this is one of those positive stories that we can say, look, people are putting that work in and they're having success. But here's the thing, it's only one part of the story, right? It's only that first step. And that's one of the things that I think we don't always acknowledge. It's not just enough to say, okay, yeah, you can vote now. But it's also to say, like, yeah, you can vote now, but also here's a hand, to help welcome you back into, or welcome you into the community. And that's the parts that's missing. And so I think when we think about this work, we have to think about that additional step. And I can tell a brief story here for a sec. My thing's going to die, so I'm going to join from my other thing, from my iPad, and I apologize for this. But I wanted to say that when people are returning to the community and when they're coming back in, one of the hard parts is like you're going back into the community, but you're surrounded by lots of different people, and you kind of have to decide on who you're going to listen to and who you're going to trust. Oh, look at that! Sorry. Can you unmute my other joined person? iPad. I don't know who has control over that. Okay. There we go. Thank you. Sorry, this is a very okay. So anyways, as I was saying, this is the joy of Jesus.
I think you're good now.
Okay. This is the joy of doing these things on the road, and I apologize. So, like I was saying, we have to. One opportunity and way to do this is to help build and develop trust, efficacy, and knowledge, right? And that's kind of the opportunity that I'm seeing that it's being offered with Community Spring, because what the research says is when it comes to engaging people who have been pushed out of the process for so long, ways to engage them are not the things that are going to typically work for the regular voter, right? These really passive ways of engaging community, whether it's through sending out flyers or doing even phone calls or any of that, postcards and things like that, and mailers. It's through the interrelational or interpersonal communication and those kinds of relationships that can make it effective. Because you have to not only say that, hey, this is something that we can do, but it's also saying that this is something that we actually should do, right? Because you have to give people a reason. And often I think when you think about why you vote, right? Why is it that you choose to go out to the ballot and exercise your right to vote? I mean, you're one of hundreds, thousands, millions of people that are voting. How are you actually going to have any efficacy? But I would suggest to you that most people end up actually voting because they believe and care about the future of their communities. And I think this is a population or community that cares about the future of their communities, but they have not in the past felt as if they are a meaningful part of that community. And so the opportunity that I see here, and the reason that I'm so supportive of this, because it's not just about coming to them at one point before an election and saying, hey, you really should get out and vote. But it's to say, look, you have agency. You have an opportunity to build solidarity with the people around you and to build connections with your community and meaningfully engage in that community. And so that's what I'm really, that's what I'm excited to be here to talk about. That's what I'm also excited to see how this turns out, particularly in Florida, because although Florida had seen so much success, we also know about all the things that the restrictive and kind of counteractions that have gone on. And so if there's an opportunity to build a, you know, to for this interpersonal interrelationship type of apparatus to build solidarity, and then to kind of convey knowledge and give people opportunity to really know about their own eligibility. That's when we're going to see not just success at one election, but success in community engagement in current and future elections to come. So thanks so much. And I apologize for the multiple devices.
All good. Thank you. I mean, that was really powerful, and just really appreciate your contributions both to the field, to the literature, and then also the support that you've given this work. And yes, I'm excited to continue the conversation about how we can make this happen here in Alachua County, across the state of Florida, and nationally, which is a segue to my last point here. So Community Spring is operating in one of the most hostile states for formerly incarcerated people. And yet, despite the systemic barriers stacked against us, what we do here really works. And we have a strong track record for making the impossible happen. Our county has the most progressive fines and fees reform in the state. We have one of the first fair chance hiring ordinances in the South. Our guaranteed income program is held up as a model for the rest of the country to follow. We believe that durable change happens at the grassroots level. And if it's done well, it drives regional and national change. And this is important because Florida, despite the challenges that we faced, cannot be left behind. We cannot be a sacrifice zone. We have to, because we know what happens as that trickles out to the rest of the country. Change starts here. It starts in our backyard. If we can do it here, it can be done anywhere. Next slide. So in terms of next steps, for all you beautiful people who've signed on to this webinar and are interested in what we do here, that QR code brings you to a link tree with a way to sign up for our newsletter, follow us on social media. It has our website for more information. And then of course it's got that donate button. And then the other piece of this is the stage where we need to be leveraging our connections and our networks to make this work possible. There's a lot of potential here. We're already doing it. We'll keep doing it, but we think it can be bigger and better. But we need support to do that. Last slide. Thank you all for being here. We are running a little late, but I would love if anyone does have any piping hot questions, now would be a good time to take a couple of those questions. And you can unmute yourself or you can put them in the chat. And if we don't have any questions, that's fine too.
I have a question.
Oh, I have a question.
Oh, great.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Okay. I'm Julie Thaler. I live in Gainesville, but also work for the Putnam County Democratic Women's Club, and also a member of the League of Women Voters in Alachua County. So I'm very interested in how we might begin to start working our way toward the rural communities sooner than later, even if it's just on a temporary basis, so that we can start having some community conversations. And then when y'all are ready to move forward, then we could hopefully have access to some of the resources that you have available. So how do we get started without really getting started?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, our rural communities are so important. And I'm so glad that you're doing the work that you're doing in surrounding counties. Yes, I think that's great. I mean, you and I and Julius have sort of already started brainstorming on this front about, tapping into some of your networks there. But let's do it. I think at this phase, as we're doing the workshops, we're continuing to hone the curriculum, and figuring out what works, what's resonating. And, as soon as that's like finally packaged, let's go to some rural communities.
All right. Thank you.
Love it. Someone else had a question.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. This is Brittany Coleman. I work for the city, and first of all, this is a really great initiative. Thank you so much for sharing it. extremely powerful. I had a question about the amplification stage. You were talking about looking for funding. I'm wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about the funding itself. Are you looking to pay some of those folks, or like the cost of the workshop? Are you able to break that down a little bit?
Absolutely. Yes. So the amplification phase is the more sort of costly bucket of work here because we're paying the leaders. So through the workshop phase, we identify the leaders and then bring them in for train the trainers. And then they become contractors with Community Spring so that they are able to do the work in the communities and run the workshops. And I think that's a really important feature because relying on volunteers, especially for people who have multiple jobs, complicated lives, like that's not, we don't believe that's a sustainable way of doing it. We want to be able to compensate them in the same way that we're compensated. You know, Julius is running the workshops, he's on the clock for that. We think that future leaders should be too.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Wendy, you had a question in the chat too about reporting back on how it's going. Yes, absolutely. It will, I mean, at certain stages, we certainly will. I would say follow us on social media, subscribe to our newsletter. That's the best way to keep in touch with how things are going. But we have LaCoria Lynn on this call, who's our communications manager. She'll always be keeping everyone up to date about all the happenings here.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. This was really exciting to share space with you all. We are a few minutes past time, so I want to be respectful of everybody here. And we just really appreciate your engagement and your interest. And let's keep the conversation going.